This is A View from the Bunker. Now, here's Derek Gilbert.
The Middle East is in turmoil right now. Trying to understand it just in terms of geopolitics doesn't really offer all the answers. Welcome to A View from the Bunker. I'm Derek Gilbert. Joining me is a gentleman who's been a guest on the program before, has really helped open my eyes to understanding some of the forces or influences that drive the Islamic participants in what's going on in the Middle East. But he's not been on the program for far too long. He's got a PhD in Islamic eschatology. He's the author of a number of books we recommend. Holiest Wars, Islamic Mahdis, Their Jihads, and Osama bin Laden. 10 years captivation with the Mahdis camps, sects, lies, and the caliphate. The Coin of the Islamic Realm, the one I read most recently, Insurgencies in the Ottoman Empire, 1416 through 1916. And if you're looking for something a little lighter, if you're a fan of Tolkien, I highly recommend High Towers and Strong Places, A Political History of Middle Earth. We welcome back to the program Dr. Timothy Furnish. Tim, it's good to see you again.
Good to be back, Derek. And by the way, I am writing a military history of Middle Earth right now. I'm about 34,000 words into it. So God willing, it will be done, I hope, at the latest by this summer.
Been waiting for that one.
I know, it's been a while. I got sidetracked, but it's coming. It's coming.
Well, you got a teaching career now. So how are you finding academia? I'm just curious.
Well, I adjuncted a couple of places, undergraduate and graduate. So since I'm an adjunct, I stay out of all that political stuff.
Oh, okay.
My full-time job really is writing, but my wife said since my books weren't selling as well as I had hoped, she said go find another part-time job. So that's why I've been teaching.
It is hilarious when people send you notes and say you only write because it's an easy way to make lots of money. They don't understand, A, how difficult it is, and B, the fact is it really does not produce the income people think.
Well, I will tell you, this will be my last nonfiction book because I published a fiction story last year, science fiction story, and I'm moving into fiction because that sells so much better, unless you're somebody with a large publishing house that can push your stuff. So, I'm moving into fiction as soon as I can.
Well, that's it. And as Sharon has discovered, because she's got 8 novels now in a series, do a series. Because once you get people hooked on the first one, and they want to find out what happens to the characters in books 2, 3, 4,
my
and so
attorney
on.
told me that, the one I'm married to.
So
yes, so I will take it under serious advisement. Yes,
that works really, really well. I want to get to the Israel-Hamas war and Iran's role in all of this because, again, people who understand that there's some differences between Sunni and Shia may be confused as to what Iran is doing, backing a Sunni proxy against Israel. But something that just popped this week that is kind of raised our antennae is that Iran launched strikes into Syria and Iraq, but then turned around and launched strikes into Pakistan against a Sunni group, a separatist group, and of course that prompted Pakistan to launch a retaliatory strike against the same group apparently, but on the Iranian side of the border. And of course with Pakistan being a nuclear power, that kind of makes you go, well, what's going on here?
Yeah, that was kind of surprising, wasn't it? Because Iran and Pakistan, even though one's a Sunni state, one's a Shia state, have gotten along pretty well since the revolution in '79. But it turns out, though, Derek, they may have not been striking the same group.
Oh, okay.
Right, yeah. So Iran, so there's a region of southern Iran and Pakistan where the two countries meet called Baluchistan. It's on the Iranian side, there's a province called Sistan. On the Pakistani side, it's called Baluchistan. And the Baluch or the Baloch are a separate ethnic group. They're not Pakistani. They're not Iranian. They have a separate language. And they straddle the border, basically. I mean, they're as you remarked to me before we came on air, they're somewhat similar to the Kurds, the situation of the Kurds, in that they are situated in areas that straddle several countries. And of course, as we know, the Kurds got the shaft at the end of World War I. It's a little more complex, and I don't know quite as much about exactly why that happened to the Baloch. It didn't have to do with World War I, of course, but the same situation prevails, however, which is that you've got an ethnic group who don't have their own country, that feel like they should have their own country. And then, of course, that's complicated by the fact that they are Sunni. The Baloch are Sunni. Many of them are located in Iran, so therefore they do not get along well, needless to say, with the Shia clerical government in Tehran. So the group that Iran hit was a group called Jaish al-Adl, which means Army of Justice, basically. And it came out of a larger group from some years ago called Jundallah, the Army of Allah. And so it is Sunni, but it's really, in some ways, it's an insurgency. They're not just a terrorist group, although interestingly enough, there are 4 countries in the world that list Jaish al-Adl as a terrorist group. Only 4. Iran, of course, New Zealand, Syria, I believe it is, and the United States of America, for some strange reason. Well, I should say we had them listed as a terrorist group, and then, never mind, they are still listed as a terrorist group. I won't get into too much detail about different levels of terrorist group, but they're listed as terrorist group. So Iran hit their bases and some of their combatants, some of their militants in Pakistani territory. And they also, as you said, which sort of a convoluted connection there, but they also hit some groups in Iraqi Kurdistan that they accuse of helping Israel. It's sort of a, sort of not very well held secret that Israel and the Kurds sometimes cooperate at certain levels, especially vis-a-vis Iran. Now, whether this was actually the case or Iran just wanted to do something to sort of, raise the ante with Israel is another issue, and I guess we can get back into that in a minute. But so Iran hits this group called Jaish al-Adl on the Pakistani side of the border. The Pakistanis then respond by hitting a group inside Iran. It was not, as near as I could tell by some stuff I looked up today, it was not the same group. It was a group called the Beluch Liberation Front, BLF. The Beluch Liberation Front is a group that specifically, it's different from Jaish al-Adl. And it mainly fights against Pakistan. And it's, instead of being religious and nationalist, it's Marxist-Leninist and nationalist. It's a Marxist group. It existed back in the 60s and 70s. It went away, Marxist separatist group. It went away, and then it resurfaced in the early part of this century. And it has been fighting against the Pakistanis. So basically, they each hit a group that they're opposed to on the other country's territory. Now, what's interesting about this, according to what I read, was that the Iranians, of course, who started this, didn't bother to tell the Pakistanis they were going to do it, which is very interesting because Pakistan is 3 times the population of Iran and has nuclear weapons and has quite a number of nuclear weapons. So you would think that the Iranians would sort of tread lightly and, apprise the Pakistanis of what they're doing. You're going to hit somebody inside the border, say, well, we're just going to hit these guys. We're not trying to kill Pakistanis. We're trying to kill these guys. But they didn't seem to have done that according to the Pakistanis. So the Pakistanis were basically going tit for tat on the other side. But it's an interesting development because, again, Pakistan is the one of 9 countries in the world with nuclear weapons. So
that is bizarre. What could motivate Iran to do something like that? Are they just kind of feeling their oats right now, or is there some sense of destiny at this point? Are they feeling the hand of Allah, moving here, or what all is going on?
I think that's a good point. I think that's the only thing I really think that makes sense at this point is that they think that the situation vis-a-vis Israel with Hamas and the Houthis or the Houthis has gone so well that they figured they could, do this with impunity. But it's one thing to attack Israel. It's if you're a Muslim country. It's another to attack a fellow Muslim country, especially one that's much larger and frankly more powerful than you. So I think that, who did this in Iran? It was probably the Republican Guards, right? Mm-hmm. The Republican Guards are basically the Praetorian Guard for the Iranian regime, and they're the special forces. They basically keep the clerical regime in power, and they also operate overseas, doing Iran's bidding in other countries. Like, for instance, they are the ones that provide the weapons to the Houthis. They're the ones that provide weapons and training to Hamas. So there's some question as to to what degree they're controlled by the government, and sometimes, or whether they operate as almost a wild card independent actor, because they've famously been under pretty tight control by the supreme leader, Khomeini, and now Khamenei. Now Khamenei is getting way up there in years. He doesn't seem to be nearly as bad as Joe Biden is, but he's getting way up there in years. And did they slip the leash with him a little bit? Maybe. And then there's an issue of the president of Iran is Ibrahim Raisi. Ibrahim Raisi probably makes Khamenei look like, Gandhi. I mean, he is a real nasty piece of work. And the betting is that he's probably going to be the next supreme leader of Iran. And, is it him feeling as though it's him sending the IRCG, the Republican guards out to do this sort of thing and see what happens? So, I don't know. I mean, the Ayatollahs are not stupid. A lot of people make the mistake of thinking just because they have beards and turbans and, they practice a form of Shia Islam that's centuries out of date in terms of politics, that they are stupid. They are anything but stupid, right? But on the other hand, their calculus, particularly when it comes to international relations, is sometimes, I don't know. Are they playing four-dimensional chess? Or are they just like winging it? I honestly, I don't know. I don't know at this point. But if I had to bet, I would say that Raisi is meddling in this, and he's trying to see how far they can push neighboring countries.
One of the things that really opened my eyes when I read your book, 10 Years Captivation with the Mahdi's Camps, was the difference, the fundamental difference between the way Shia Muslims and Sunni Muslims view eschatology, the end times. It's struck me as almost similar in some ways to the way, Christians, especially premillennial, pre-tribulational Christians, would view the end times versus, Jews, who would be looking for a geopolitical savior. I mean, it's what they were looking for in the first century, which is why they missed Jesus. And Christians would say, well, no, he's coming back when he's going to come back, which, if I understood correctly from your book, that's kind of what Shia Islam teaches, whereas Sunnis believe if they get a guy who's powerful enough, charismatic enough, and can get enough guns, he can become the Mahdi. Is that a fair, very simplistic, but a fair characterization?
I think in many ways it's accurate. You got to fine tune it a little bit, but basically the biggest difference is for the Shia, the 12er Shia. Mind you, there's more than one kind of Shia. Yep. For instance, Yemen, they're 5er Shia, not 12ers, so they don't believe in the returning 12th Imam. But the largest group, which is in Iran and Iraq, Azerbaijan, and to some degree Lebanon, the Shia there believe in the 12th Imam descended from Muhammad through Ali's line, disappeared in the 9th century, and that as a young boy, he's been kept in sort of a state of stasis by Allah, and he at some point grows up, I guess, in there, and then Allah sends him back as a fully grown man to carry out his will and basically take over the world. The Sunni don't believe that. They think that's a bunch of mystical mumbo jumbo. The Sunnis believe that, according to the hadiths, the sayings of Muhammad outside of the Quran, of which there are a number about the Mahdi. And by the way, the Mahdi is nowhere in the Quran. There's nothing in the Quran about the Mahdi. This all comes from hadiths, alleged sayings of Muhammad, which is why a lot of Muslims reject it out of hand. But of course, many don't. The Sunni believe that the Mahdi is someone, as you said, who basically will prove himself on the world stage, and he will be a great Muslim leader who will be, leader of a certain one country or kingdom or caliphate, and then regionally, and then eventually people will go, oh, well, this is the Mahdi. He sort of grows into the role, I guess. And so therefore, that's why throughout history, as I point out in my first book, it's been much easier to claim to be the Mahdi in a Sunni environment, because you basically just have to be able to lead jihad, and if you're reasonably successful, you can start making wild claims about that sort of thing. Whereas with the Shia, you have to establish, I'm this guy that disappeared 1,200 years ago, and here I am back, and let me prove you. Here's my bona fides. It's a little more difficult on that end, which is why I've always said if there's anybody that claims to be the Mahdi, it's not going to be in a Shia country like Iran. It's going to be in a Sunni country, because historically that's always what it's been. Oh, by the way, Derek, let me tell you, I mentioned this because in the class I teach in college world history, we just did the Hebrews and the Near East last week, and I assigned them to write a paper on the Ark of the Covenant, and so I sent them an article I wrote on this and the different theories about what happened to the Ark. But in Islamic tradition, there's a hadith that says that the Ark of the Covenant was actually stowed in the Sea of Galilee, or Lake Tiberias, and that when the Mahdi shows up, the Sunni Mahdi that is, this is a Sunni hadith, that he will go to the Sea of Galilee and somehow fish that out And that will be part of his proof that he's the Mahdi, because he now has the Ark of the Covenant and the power from it, so on and so forth. So
That's very interesting.
yeah, it's kind of interesting. So basically, yeah, that's the major difference. I mean, really, actually, the Mahdi, the Sunni Mahdi or the Shia Mahdi or the 12th Imam, as they call them, largely do the same thing, but one, takes over the world for Sunni Islam and one takes over the world for Shia Islam, which, for those of us that aren't Muslim wouldn't be much of a difference, would it? So, of course, they both get help from Jesus. They both get help from the returned Jesus, because in Islamic tradition, Jesus was a prophet who didn't die. He went to heaven before he died, before the crucifixion killed him. Before he was crucified, actually, and then he will return. But basically, he's sort of almost the Mahdi's assistant in both Sunni and Shia thought, and his major role is to kill the Dajjal, the Antichrist, and then basically frees up the Mahdi to do his sort of secular takeover of the world, if you will.
Which again then brings us back to what the Ayatollahs think they're doing if they're not supposed to be able to prompt the 12th Imam's return.
Hotwire the apocalypse. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Because I heard that a lot when I was hosting secular talk radio back in 2006 and 07. This was a big thing on the national talk shows. Ahmadinejad, who was the president at the time, wants to hotwire the apocalypse. He wants to blow Israel off the map, turn it into a sea of radioactive glass.
Was pushing that right and left.
Glenn Beck and Sean Hannity both. Yeah. And I was the local host on the Columbia, Missouri radio station where I was, and I was like, I don't think that sounds right, but I hadn't been introduced to your work just yet.
No, what's funny is at one point, Beck's people contacted me about being on his show, and they wanted a copy of my book, and so I got him a copy of my book, and then I never heard from him again. So I guess I didn't actually espouse the proper narrative on that.
Yeah. So I guess the question is, what do the Shia think they might accomplish by provoking or backing the play of Hamas against Israel?
Oh, well, look, there are Ayatollahs. You could find Ayatollahs that believe in hotwiring the apocalypse, all right? It, however, is not the mainstream view in Twelver Shiism. The mainstream view in Twelver Shiism, as near as I can ascertain, and I've studied it a lot, and I've actually been to Iran and made it back with all of my digits, believe it or not, for your viewers, your listeners. Probably one of the stupider things I ever did, that I went to Iran, but I was like, it's a free trip on the Ayatollah's dime, and that was back in 2008. Anyway, I wrote an article. I wrote two articles about it. One was in the Lutheran Witness, because I was Lutheran at the time, and the other one was, believe it or not, in the Weekly Standard, before the Weekly Standard went kaput. Yeah. But I wrote something for Bill Kristol's people. What was wrong with me? Anyway, they paid me, so what the heck. Let's see, how should I put this? There are some Ayatollahs that believe in hotwiring the apocalypse, but again, it's a minority view among the Shia. The majority view is basically that the Mahdi will come when the Mahdi comes, when Allah decides it's time, and there's not really much you can do about it, all right? Now, who holds that view in the clerical leadership is the question, and no one knows for sure, because you'd probably have to interview them. I fear that, as I mentioned earlier, the guy that's the current president of Iran, Ibrahim Raisi, and remember, just so everyone knows, the president doesn't run the country. The supreme leader runs the country. Mm-hmm. But the president, this president will probably, very likely, I think, be the next supreme leader when Khamenei goes to meet the Houthis in the afterlife, although he'll probably get a rude awakening, I think. I think he won't wake up in a very hot place, but that's just me. So the thing with Iran, I mean, everything that Iran does is not eschatological. That's the mistake some people make. You think everything's eschatological. Well, not everything. Some of it's just pure power politics, right? Iran, since the revolution, even before the revolution, when Khomeini was doing his diatribes on cassette tape and sending them back to Iran back in the 70s so they could be clandestinely listened to when the Shah was in power, which eventually turned out they worked really well because they prepared the way for his revolution. Khomeini has always been adamantly opposed to Israel. A lot of Muslim intellectuals were opposed to Israel, on regional power politics grounds. with this king of Saudi Arabia. I mean, Abdulaziz famously was. So, I mean, a number of them were Ibn Saud, I should say. So then once the revolution occurred, it became a staple of Iranian foreign policy. Mainly, I think there was maybe a little eschatological tinge to it, but I think mostly it was because it was a very convenient club with which to beat the Arabs over the head, particularly the Saudis. Because you could say, the Iranians would say, the Saudis or the Jordanians or the Egyptians, and their big issue was, of course, with the Saudis, because that's their big rivals. Well, look, especially after some of the Arab countries started making peace with Israel, right? It was like, well, look, you Arabs have abandoned the Palestinians, but we Iranians, and we don't even have any, territorial claims on the Zionist entity, as they call it. But we're standing up for these poor, persecuted Palestinians, and you rich Saudis aren't doing a darn thing to help them anymore. So really, and this especially accelerated after, the various peace treaties, and it really took off in recent years with President Trump. When President Trump got we went from 2 to 6 countries, Arab countries, that signed peace treaties with Israel. And I think this had a lot to do with the timing of this, because Saudi Arabia and Israel were this close to basically signing a formal peace treaty. Because the Saudis and the Israelis are like, look, we don't have beef with each other. And in fact, we both have a common enemy, which is Iran. So I really think probably the major reason for them basically goading Hamas and telling them, hey, time to use all those weapons we've been providing you, was in order to abort basically this peace treaty between Israel and Saudi Arabia. Now, I saw recently where I think it was the Saudi ambassador to Great Britain, said that they were still on track to at some point normalize their relations, but they weren't sure when that was going to be, right? Mm-hmm. Because they both, again, realized that they don't really have a bone to pick with each other. And the Saudis are trying to modernize, under really who's the de facto ruler, who's Mohammed bin Salman, that they realize at some point the oil's going to run out. They need to modernize. And they've started allowing tourism, to that country, which is amazing. So I think the major reason was that that Iran wanted to short circuit this rapprochement between the Saudis and the Israelis, and I think too. I mean, if you go back and look, I wrote an article in the stream when this happened. It was called what I call it, Hamas, Iran's bloodthirsty sock puppet. It's up on the stream. And I went through some of the various reasons they did this. I think part of it was because, Russia and Iran are, I wouldn't say allies, but they get along in some ways, and they cooperate in certain issues. And you notice what happened after this Hamas-Israel dust-up. Ukraine kind of got pushed to the back pages, right?
It did, yeah.
There's part of that too. I also think there was an element, although less important probably than those two things, there was an element that, Turkey and Israel used to be basically allies. I remember I think it was my first and second trips to Israel, 2003 and 2007. And both times I remember being in Israel and whatever hotel I stayed at, in Jerusalem, that was, Tel Aviv or Jerusalem, I think it was both. There were Turkish army officers, Turkish military officers staying there. But then Erdogan got annoyed with the Israelis, and besides Saudi Arabia, Iran's other big rival, of course, is Turkey. Turkey has a different approach than the Saudis do, but the Turks have a lot of cachet from the fact that the Ottomans ran the place for hundreds of years. But there were rumors that Erdogan was actually thinking about reestablishing relations with Israel, and then of course now after this with Iran again goading Hamas into doing this, that's not going to happen for the foreseeable future. So I really think that most of what Iran's doing with Hamas and with these, particularly with Hamas and the attacks on Israel, have to do with regional power politics and not really with eschatology.
For people who aren't familiar with the differences between Sunni and Shia and why there's so much conflict between those two major divisions within Islam, what is the problem between the Sunnis and the Shias? Why don't they like each other, and how intense is that dislike?
Yeah. Well, it's funny. It's interesting. You'll often read, sometimes people will analogize it to the Catholic Protestant split, but it's not. It's sort of the obverse of that. When Luther nailed the 95 Theses up, Luther was just making religious points. He had no desire to break politically or to fracture. He had no desire to break with the Catholic Church. He had no desire to fracture Europe, which is what happened because you couldn't separate church and politics back then. So that was the Protestant Reformation was a theological issue that became political. The Sunni-Shia split is the opposite. It's a political issue that became theological because it's a fight over who's going to be the caliph. It's a fight over who's going to succeed Muhammad as the ruler, which is what the caliph were. The caliphs were. Khalifa. Khalifa in Arabic means to succeed, to come after. So after Muhammad died, although he had 11 wives, none of them were sons. And, 7th century Arabia is not going to put a woman in charge. I mean, for gosh sakes, 21st century Arabia is not going to put a woman in charge. So who becomes the head of the Islamic community? Not as prophet, because the Muslims believe that ends with, the Sunnis believe that ends with Muhammad. But as the other two roles Muhammad had, which were political ruler, king basically, and commander of the armies. So you need somebody to do that. The Sunnis basically, the small coterie of power brokers that were electing. I mean, we don't know exactly, but probably a couple of dozen guys at most, picking the caliph. I mean, if Muhammad had a son, they probably would have picked him, but they didn't have one. So you couldn't establish monarchy, and they just said, well, we're just going to pick whoever we think can lead jihad. And basically, the characteristics required became, can you lead jihad, and are you a pious practicing Muslim? And basically, was what later they added more, but that was the two main ones. But there was a minority group within the Islamic community called the Shi'at Ali, the faction of Ali, hence the word Shia eventually. It's shortened to Shia. Said that, well, if Muhammad doesn't have a son, we have to find the nearest male relative because Allah has given the bloodline of the Prophet Muhammad some special ability to lead. Well, the closest male relative to Muhammad was his much younger cousin, Ali, who also had the political sense to marry Muhammad's daughter. Well, that came in Fatima, which, good career move. He didn't make the cut for the first caliph, didn't make the cut for the second, didn't make the cut for the third, and finally he made the cut later on. And it turned into a civil war because most Muslims didn't think there should be this, hereditary imperative, and he was eventually assassinated. And then basically what happened is the majority of Muslims came to believe you didn't need any sort of bloodline descendant from Muhammad to be the leader. This became known as the Sunnis. Most Muslims are Sunnis, but a substantial minority, and about 10 to 15% of the world's Muslims are Shia, and of those, about 2/3 of those are Twelvers. So what's that? I don't know, 9% of the world's, something like that. Hey, I'm a historian. Don't expect accurate numbers. Anyway, there's a fairly substantial group that, of course, came to believe that the only legitimate leader of the Islamic community, and thus of the entire Islamic world, is someone descended from Muhammad. So then the larger group, again, we talk about 12 or Shia, believe that there were 12 imams, as they call them, the rightful leaders of the Islamic world, starting with Ali, because Muhammad's the prophet, he's a little different. So then they go with Ali, and then they trace it down through his sons, Hassan and Hussein, and they go on down. And sometimes it's a little bifurcated. You have to look at the chart. You can find it online. The line of the 12 or Shia imams. And sometimes it's like somebody dies without a son, and then it goes over to his brother or something like that. But eventually they believe that down to about the year 871 or 873, we're not sure exactly, there was the 12th imam who was named Muhammad also. Young kid, disappeared. And as I said earlier, he's the one that went into stasis, and then he will eventually emerge as the Mahdi. Now, as a historian, as a Christian, I believe that this kid just probably died. And that, but if there be no other male relatives to pass on the line of imams, then your branch of the religion dies out. So I believe they came up with this elaborate theory. And I got to hand it to them. I mean, they've convinced millions of people over the years to believe this, and still to believe it. I mean,
sort of like the Islamic King Arthur. He'll return in the hour of greatest need, or something like that.
That's a very good analogy. Yeah, that's very good. Yeah. Except there's probably more I don't know, I probably believe more in King Arthur than this one, but anyway, but that's the difference. And so, a lot of it's religious, but I mean, it's political and religious. And then the Shia adopts certain viewpoints theologically that aren't exactly the same. There tends to be more mysticism in Shiism. Mysticism is looked upon with very much a jaundiced eye in the Sunni world. Most of the Sunnis are very matter of fact. You read the Quran, you pray 5 times a day, you go to mosque on Friday, you follow the Sharia, whatever degree of Sharia you have in your country, and you're good to go with Allah, right? The Shia are more sort of mystical. They believe that they're more sort of like the Sufis, which are the mystics of Islam, and they believe that there's a little bit more to it than that. But again, the big one you point out is that they believe in basically a deliverer, and you'll often see even Islamic sources will refer to him as the Savior, and I think that confuses people because, Jesus as the Savior is quite different from this. This is exactly like you said. This is like the Old Testament Sheikh. This is the Messiah of the Old Testament, the one that the Jews were looking for under Roman occupation.
Right.
And who, by the way, I wrote an article on Stream on this too before Christmas about the run up to Jesus, because in the 1st century BC, Rome having taken over Judea in 63 BC, up until 66 AD, right, and really going on up into the early part of the 2nd century AD, there was just a proliferation of people claiming to be the Messiah in Judea.
Yeah, and it was really complicated because not only did you have the Romans come in there, you had the Parthians came in there and took over for a little while, and Herod the Great went to Rome, got permission from Mark Antony to come back with an army, and in fact there was a segment of the Essenes who thought that Herod was the Messiah when he arrived. And
I didn't know that. Really?
Oh yeah. Herod was looked at as because he led a successful military action to push the Parthians out. And so they thought, okay, he's the guy. Oh, wait, no, he's aligned with the Romans, and the Romans are still here. So, okay, he's not the guy. Right. But actually, Herod was very friendly to the Essenes because there was an Essene by the name of Menachem who prophesied that Herod would one day become king. And so that's why there's an Essene quarter in Jerusalem to this day.
That's interesting.
So
it's very similar. So the Mahdi in Islam is very much like what the Jews were looking for in 1st century AD, which was basically a warlord to take over militarily and politically, and not some guy that's going to suffer and die on a cross. It's a whole different perspective.
And you kind of alluded a little bit to the other difference that we in the West don't often understand. I very famously, in my own mind, this is one of those moments I wish I could take back. Back in the early 80s, one of our exchange students at Knox College in Galesburg, Illinois, was Mahmoud, who was an Iranian. And during breaks in the school calendar, he had to go back and fight in the war against Saddam Hussein.
Oh, gosh.
And I didn't understand. I said, well, why are you Arabs all fighting each other? And he got very offended.
You called him an Arab.
I called him an Arab. And so I made a similar mistake in an Armenian restaurant in Jerusalem where I talked about their Turkish coffee being great. And it was like, as soon as I said it, I realized how dumb that was. But the Turks,
it's like calling an Irishman an Englishman.
Yeah, except worse.
Except worse.
So,
depending on how much the Irishman has had to drink, could be worse that way.
Yeah. So the Turks, the Arabs, the Persians, and we mentioned the Beluch at the beginning of the program. There are a lot of ethnicities in the Middle East who, despite sharing or at least nominally sharing religion, don't like each other on ethnic grounds.
Right, and people got to keep that in mind. I mean, it is important to know the Sunni-Shia difference, but even there, I mean, there's different sects of Shia, and there's different sects of Sunni. Muslims would have you believe, oh, it's all one big happy family. No, it's not. And even then, it can be overridden by tribal and ethnic loyalties, as you point out. I mean, the Turks. The 3 major groups in the Middle East, ethno-linguistically, are the Arabs, the Turks, and the Iranians, the Persians. But there's the Beluch, and then there's the Kurds. The Kurds are their own thing. If you ever you can Google ethno-linguistic map of the Middle East and just look at it sometime. There are dozens and dozens of ethnic groups in the Middle East.
Yeah, Alawites and Druze and other religious groups that are little splinters off of the main sects as well. So what is driving Hamas then? What is their goal? I mean, is it geopolitical or is it religious?
Yes, elimination of Israel.
Right.
I mean, Hamas, Harikat al-Muqawama al-Islamiyya, it's an acronym for the Islamic resistance movement. Hamas is the Palestinian branch of the Muslim Brotherhood. Unlike the larger Muslim Brotherhood, Hamas has gone whole hog, if that's not an Islamophobic thing to say. Hamas has gone whole hog with basically militant jihad. I mean, the Muslim Brotherhood, people argue about this. I don't want to get off track too much, but people argue about whether the Muslim Brotherhood should be a terrorist organization. I don't think the Muslim Brotherhood as a whole should be classified as a terrorist organization because it's mainly political. However, its offshoots like Hamas that clearly engage in jihad and terrorism should be. So Hamas came to be in 1987, and then it was basically sort of competing back then. I mean, you still had the PLO and you had those groups. The PLO, who is, of course, secular nationalist, but terrorist, and a number of other groups like the PFLP, Popular Front for Liberation of Palestine, which is avowedly Marxist. So you had a number of groups opposed to Israel. And Hamas was part of the sort of new wave of Islamic resistance to Israel, because the PLO had always been simply secular nationalist, and some of the other groups were Marxists, as I said. And so basically they were underground in a terrorist group fighting against Israel, but then they started participating in elections, getting into the electoral process like the Muslim Brotherhood itself did, of course, in places like Egypt. And then they won the elections in 2006. And remember, you've got the Palestinian territories are basically two widely separated territories. There's the West Bank, and then there's Gaza Strip. And the Hamas won the elections in both sides, but the Palestinian Authority, which is what the political group that grew out of the PLO, quickly moved to kick them out of the West Bank so they could maintain control of the West Bank. So basically the only place they could take power was in the Gaza Strip. Nobody wants anything to do with the Gaza Strip, including the Egyptians. I don't know if you've seen these in the media lately. They've had those pictures up of those giant, like 30-foot tall walls and with concertina wire that the Egyptians have built. I mean, look, you got to feel bad for the Palestinians in some ways in the Gaza Strip. I mean, first of all of them didn't vote for Hamas. Right. Hamas got I don't know if it was even 50% of the vote. It might have been a plurality. I'd have to go look. And it might have been slightly over majority, but there's still a lot of Palestinians that didn't vote for Hamas. They're stuck there in the Gaza Strip. Egypt won't take them. Jordan won't take them. The Saudis won't take them. Nobody will take them. And so they're stuck there. And with the Israeli offensive going on, and Israel certainly has a very legitimate beef against Hamas. There's no doubt about that. But Hamas, if you look at their organization, they look at what they avowedly have said, they want to eliminate Israel. They think Israel is an illegitimate state, that all the Jews that live there should go somewhere else. Or if they want to stay there, they would have to live under Islamic law, because Hamas clearly wants Islamic law. They've said this. So that's what they want. And basically, they may get help from a few other places. I mean, there have been arguments that the Turks under Erdogan have been helping them some, but it's pretty clear that their main supplier of both funds and weapons is Iran, and Iran, as I said earlier, basically supports them in order to mainly, again, to make the other Arab countries, to make the other Muslim countries, particularly Arab countries, look bad. But also, it is a plank of the Iranian Republic, the Islamic Republic of Iran's constitution, that Israel is a foreign entity. They call it the Zionist entity, that it was basically imposed by colonialism, and therefore it needs to cease to exist.
Yeah, I was surprised when I went back and did a little more reading of the history of the region and found that Israel tried to give Gaza back to Egypt after the Yom Kippur War in 1973, and Egypt wouldn't take it.
You take it. No, you take it. No.
But that was just a year or so after the PLO, which had been in Jordan, in refugee camps there. Tried to rise up against King Hussein, and Hussein wasn't having it, and the Jordanians kicked him out, and they went to Lebanon, and they got involved in this. Right, and that led to the murder, the assassination of the Israeli Olympic athletes in Munich.
Right, as in Munich, right.
Yeah, so I just vaguely remember that as a thing when I was in grade school. I had no idea what was going on, really. It's like, oh, well, that's bad, and then move on to other things.
Right. You normally don't kill people at the Olympics. It's kind of frowned upon.
Yeah, it is. But this is history that we in the West tend to forget. We tend to forget that there's a 14th century history of Islam and its relations with other nations, other religions, other parts of the world. I mean, one of the reasons the West is called the West is that's all that was left after the armies of Islam got done with Christendom back in the 7th and 8th centuries. Yeah. I'm just curious now, looking at the way Yemen has got its finger on a chokehold, really, on about 10% of the world's trade there at the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. What's the difference between the 12er Shias and the 5er Shias in Yemen?
Okay, so let's see. I'm trying to think the easiest way to explain this. Okay, the group in Yemen are called the Houthis or the Houthis. That's a tribal designation. Religiously, about 40% of Yemen, and Yemen, by the way, has a fairly large population. If you took out the expatriates in Saudi Arabia, Yemen has a larger population than Saudi Arabia. It's something like 30 million.
Really?
Yeah. Yemen is about 40% Zaydi, what's called Zaydi Islam, Zaydi Shia. There are three branches of Shia Islam. The 12ers were the ones we talked about earlier. They're the majority. There are also what are called Seveners or Ismailis, and Fivers or Zaydis. And this comes from, the numerical designation comes from how many imams do they think were the legitimate ones. Instead of going all the way down to 12, the Zaydis will go to 5, a guy named Zayd. The Ismailis go to 7, a guy named Ismail. So basically, it's a dispute about whether the line after them was legitimate or not. Because remember earlier I said sometimes an imam would die and he wouldn't have any kids, and then it would pass to his brother or something like that. So there are arguments about that. So basically what happened was a group of Shia that believed that there were only 5 legitimate imams came to power in Iran. And interestingly, I mean, this happened about, 900 and some AD. They've been there for over 1,000 years. And what's really ironic too is that they actually were sort of converted, I guess you could say, to this brand of Islam by Zaydi missionaries from near the Caspian Sea in what is now Iran. This was before Iran became 12. Just to add more confusing issues to this, Iran did not become 12 Shia until the 16th century. You may know this, but some people don't. Iran was forcibly converted to 12 Shiism by a dynasty called the Safavids. And came to power in 1501, 1502. So before that, Iran, as far as we know, was probably largely Sunni. But it had pockets of different kinds of Shiism, because the Shia, as I alluded to earlier, the Shia basically, for the most part, lived as persecuted minorities in majority Sunni countries. Well, anyway, so the Zaydis came to power, particularly in the highlands of northwestern Yemen. And there are several tribes that converted to this, and one of them was called the Houthi or Houthi tribe. So it's you can kind of differentiate. Zaydi or Fiver Shiism is the brand of Islam they practice, and it's very similar to the Shiism of Iran. With the difference is it's less eschatological, because they don't believe they're waiting on some sort of imam to return, like the 12th imam comes back, as the Messiah, messianic figure in 12. They don't believe in that. But they do believe in basically that traditionally Zaydi or Fiver Shiism believes that the leader, every generation, I guess, sort of has a Mahdi-like figure that leads them, but he's basically just sort of like a mini caliph, if you will, right? So he doesn't have really any sort of mystical eschatological purpose. He's just the guy that's in charge. So they had what's called an imamate, and these people ran at least the northwestern or the western highlands part of Yemen for hundreds and hundreds of years. And in my book, The Coin of the Islamic Realm, I talk about insurgencies against the Ottomans. And twice, back in the 16th century and again in the late 19th century, the Ottomans sent massive forces to Yemen to try to basically occupy it and force it. Because why? Well, for a number of reasons. The Ottomans wanted to control Yemen, because, as you pointed out, even back then, Red Sea trade was important. and B, it's located within striking distance of Mecca and Medina. So the Ottomans, who that was called the Vilayet of the Hijaz, the western province of Arabia, but they figured they'd just go on down and try to take it. Well, both times they were there for many years, and they had their successes. But as I point out in my book, it's kind of like it was sort of like the Vietnam or the Afghanistan, if you will, for the Ottomans, because they never really managed to pacify it. And the Zaydis, they didn't like the Turks because they were foreigners. They were not Arabs. I didn't like the Turks because they were Sunni, not Shia. So now what happens in the modern times is that a couple of the Houthi tribe guys, and these Houthis, the Houthi tribe is all Zaydi Shia. Some of these guys went and trained in Iran. And so they kind of picked up a lot of Iranian Twelver Shia ideas in terms of anti-colonialism, in terms of hating Israel, in terms of United States is the great Satan, Israel is the small Satan. Marg bar America, death to America. Marg bar America. And so they sort of changed some the traditional Zaydi Shia beliefs to make them more like post-1979 Iranian anti-Western beliefs. So you got that, and basically a lot of complex stuff has gone on in Yemen in recent years. But basically what's happened is this group, these folks, have taken over, not all, but they took over the capital and much of northwestern Yemen, and other parts of Yemen they don't control. And they just basically invited the Iranians in. The Iranians are one of the few groups that's willing to help them. And I really think, if you go look up, the movement was actually called Ansar Allah, which means partisans of Allah, basically. It was originally what it's called. And if you look up their little logo, I had it up here earlier. Basically, it says their official flag. It says, hang on a second, Derek, I'm just going to go look it up, but I'm trying to remember what it says. It says, death to America, death to Israel, death to Jews, something like that. Now, needless to say, that has not traditionally been a viewpoint of Zaydi Shia, because for most of Zaydi Shia's existence, there wasn't an America, and there wasn't an Israel. And actually, you probably know this, there was actually a fairly vibrant and not inconsiderable Jewish community in Yemen.
Right. Good friend of ours who owns a tour company that we used to go to Israel is married to a Yemeni Jew.
Yeah.
So.
One of my Arabic professors at Ohio State when I was in graduate school was a Yemeni Arab, or a Yemeni Jew. He was a Yemeni Jew, spoke fluent Arabic, of course, because he was from Yemen. I don't think there are many of those folks left there anymore.
There are not.
But I tend to think that a lot of this is just modern politics. Nobody really will help, not to make excuses for the Houthis, but basically Iran's willing to help them. And they do have, again, I learned this in writing this book about how much the Ottomans fought them and occupied their country. They do have legitimate beefs. I mean, there have been times where, especially after their imamate was abolished in 1962, and from 1962 up to modern times, when they were basically treated pretty shabbily by the majority Sunni government, all right? Now, I'm not saying this justifies them launching missiles at ships, but basically they have, it's not quite as one-sided or one-dimensional as they make it out to be in the media. I mean, I don't think the Houthis can just be seen as terrorists. They're people that got the short end of the stick for many years, and they're trying to get some help from the international community. Well, here comes Iran with all this money and all these weapons, and Iran's like, well, you're not the same kind of Shia as us, but you're close enough. And again, why is Iran doing this? Well, mainly, I don't think in this case because of Israel, although that's a nice sort of like follow-on effect. It's mainly because they don't get along with the Saudis.
Right.
And so they're on the same, plot of land. They're on the Arabian Peninsula with the Saudis, and they could just cause more problems for the Saudis, which from an Iranian point of view is perfect. So they cause problems for the Saudis. They can launch missiles at Israel. Oh, they're probably not going to hit anything because, it's like Saddam launching the Scuds during the Gulf War, right?
Right.
How many Iranians does it take to launch a Scud? 2, one to light the wick and one to watch CNN to see where it winds up. I mean, that's kind of what they're doing.
Yeah.
But I mean, they are, as you pointed out correctly, they are raising shipping costs and causing people to have to go around the Cape of Good Hope instead of going through the Suez Canal. But I'm pretty sure that's not the Houthis' idea. I'm pretty sure that's coming from the Republican Guards again.
Yep.
Yeah.
2024 promises to be an interesting year. It already is interesting. We're not even all the way through January yet. Well, Tim, where do people follow your work?
Well, I used to blog pretty regularly, but it's kind of like fallen on the wayside because I've had so much other stuff doing. But I do have the blog post. I do have the blog site called Occidental Jihadist. But really, if you really want to follow my stuff, I write pretty regularly at the Stream. So go over to thestream.org, and that's usually where you can find some stuff. In fact, I'm going to write an article. I'm supposed to be writing an article tonight or tomorrow on this very topic we've been talking about for the Stream.
All right. Well, I'll put a link to that and also a link to your books at Amazon for viewers, listeners who are interested. Check the show notes below this video or audio. And Tim, we'll have to stay in closer contact. Like I said, it's been too long since the last time we spoke. Dr. Timothy Furnish, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Derek.
Again, check the show notes for links to the books by Dr. Timothy Furnish. I defer to him in all things related to Islamic eschatology, kind of a very narrow academic topic for most of us Westerners, but we are thankful that Tim has followed this leading, and while his books may not sell as well as he would hope, those of us who have actually purchased and read them are truly blessed by the information. Coming up, another group besides Islamic fundamentalists whose actions seem to defy logic, that would be American progressives, whose actions, conclusions defy logic. For example, here in these United States, where we can, I think, confidently say without fear of contradiction that we are in the midst of an obesity pandemic, can we face a crisis called food deserts? Yes, food deserts in a land filled with fat people. Bless their pointy little heads. That is straight ahead as A View from the Bunker continues. It's a new month, and we have a new special at the Gilbert House online store.
We have a crazy, crazy deal on all of our DVDs. They are, regardless of the retail price, they are 75% off.
We keep hearing from the kids these days that everything is going to streaming video, that DVDs are old school.
Oh, not for us.
No, we are old school. And besides, we don't trust the internet will always be there. So take advantage of this special offer. Everything from our travel documentaries. Basically follow us as we go through the Holy Land and show you the important sites at ground zero on this supernatural war, plus video teachings, presentations, and much, much more.
You know, with 75% off savings on all the DVDs, as many as you want to get, you've got the money that you saved to go out and buy a DVD player.
That's it. Take advantage of it now online only at the Gilbert House store, gilberthouse.org/store. And thank you for your prayers and support. Talking the walk every Sunday night from these beautiful Missouri Ozarks. This is A View from the Bunker. I'm Derek Gilbert. You'll find us online at VFTB.net. Our web hub for everything we do, gilberthouse.org, gilberthouse.org, my personal website, derekpgilbert.com, social media, Twitter X, formerly Twitter, @ViewFromBunker, or @Derek Gilbert. That's D-E-R-E-K, by the way. Use as few letters as you can get away with to spell it, and you'll probably get it right. On, say, Facebook, View from the Bunker, Truth Social, Gab Me, we get her at Derek P. Gilbert, and Threads, at Derek Gilbert there as well. Interesting week here in the Ozarks. We don't get a lot of snow typically in any given winter. We had a little bit this past couple of weeks, but what really hit us on Monday, and what is usually more a threat or a danger to us in wintertime here in the Ozarks, we've learned in the 9 years since we've moved here, is ice. And Monday, I found out once again the hard way how quickly your world can change. And for the second time in 9 years, I can say pretty confidently there was some divine intervention on my behalf. I've not talked about this much, but if you go back to our 2015 archives at Skywatch TV, you'll notice that in the first few months there, March, April, May of 2015, if you can still find those videos, you'll notice a mark on my forehead. It's because just before we moved here, it's my last day going out with my sales manager, my former employer, to call on good customers and say, Derek is moving on, and don't worry, we've still got you covered. My foot caught at the top step of our stairway. We were about 6 foot drop from the top of that stairway down to the concrete driveway, and I pitched face first down toward the driveway. And while I can never be sure, and of course I can't prove it, I distinctly remember something shoving me from my left side to the right into an evergreen shrub before hitting bottom. I thought as I was going face first down this flight of steps, this is it. I'm going to hit head first on the concrete, and that's it. As it was, I wound up with a bump on my forehead. My glasses didn't even get scratched, and I was fine. Well, Monday this week, came out here to the barn to do some work, and even though no traffic, our county sheriff here was basically telling people, stay home, do not go out on the road because you'll wind up in the ditch. St. Louis had the same thing going on Monday. Saw a video of a fire truck in suburban St. Louis sliding through a cul-de-sac and taking out cars as it went because the fire truck couldn't get any traction. Well, I thought not to worry because the walkway between the house and the barn here is gravel. Rough surface, no problem. Wrong. Feet went out from under me, and as I was walking Grace out here, Grace, our rescue dog, 50-pound flat-coated retriever, she was very upset as I hit the ground in a hurry. She sensed something was wrong. Thankfully, nothing more than bruises. Nothing more than bruises. Elbow still a little swollen, still a little sore when I bend it. Left ribs sore, but again, nothing permanent, just a reminder that things can change on a dime. And so you need to be prepared regardless of whenever and wherever you are for what comes after. So again, thank you. I have not made a big deal of this because, again, not seriously hurt, just bruised, pride more than anything else. Just nothing that Tylenol, extra strength Tylenol hasn't been able to handle. So thankful for that. But and I know there are many others out there who are dealing with physical maladies much, much worse than me. But again, just a reminder, be careful out there. There are people who depend on you and who care about what happens to you. And so don't take that for granted. The older I get, the more I realize how smart my dad was. He keeps getting smarter, and he's been gone since 2005. Anyway, one of the things that just really astonishes me here about our United States is how we can invent problems to make it seem like we got it so much worse than we actually do. We are probably the heaviest nation on earth. And I know I used the term fat people before the break, and that may be offensive to some, but I say this as somebody who carried extra weight nearly all of his life. I got, I was the stereotypical smart, chubby kid in grammar school who was just a bully magnet. That's all right. You deal with it. You learn to grow from it when you grow older, and you move on. And thankfully, again, through the Holy Spirit and through the love of a wonderful woman, I've been able to get beyond those hang-ups that might have been caused by being the bully magnet in grammar school. And I will say that having Grace has really helped as well. Eating healthy has done a lot. If you go back to the early videos from Skywatch TV from 2015, you'll see that Sharon in particular, she's dropped 120 pounds and she's kept it off. I've lost 50 pounds and I've kept it off. And it's not really through any exercise, because mostly what we do is write and talk. So there's not a lot of exercise in that. But if you eat properly, getting rid of junk carbohydrates mostly, and pushing more protein, fruit, and veg, you can do a lot just with that. And that is mainly what we've done. And even then adding a little exercise to that with Grace, the wonder dog here, except for this week, because it's just been too icy and then too muddy since then, because it's been raining ever since it warmed up after the ice storm Monday. But beyond, outside of that, and except for the very coldest days this winter, she's been getting me out 3 times a day to walk. And I've dropped another 5 pounds just from walking 3 times a day. Well, here in America, though, 21st century America in particular, we are so sedentary and our food choices are so poor that we are the most obese civilization in history, I think. That's probably a safe statement to make. But here in America, while we've got the majority of us overweight and a disturbing percentage in the category of obese and morbidly obese, I mean, this is becoming a problem even from a national security standpoint because we can't find enough kids who are physically fit enough to perform the tasks required of soldiers. That is a problem. And yet, we're told that one of the biggest problems facing our major urban centers here is food deserts. Food deserts, areas where people cannot get access to healthy food. Part of this problem, however, is the crime rate in many of our large cities, where George Soros, through his funding of political races, specifically district attorneys, has transformed many of our urban centers into places where organized theft is legal. I mean, it's not really legal, but there are so few consequences that it might as well be. And so crime rings are acting as though it is, in fact, legal. And in California, you've got that law that was passed a few years ago where anything up to $950 in shoplifting is considered a misdemeanor. And most criminals are not prosecuted for it or punished to any great extent. So you do a risk-reward analysis, and the reward of the shoplifting is much greater than the risk of being caught and punished. So why not? Retailers, finding this to be the case, are fleeing our urban centers. In Boston, Walgreens has closed down 4 stores here in a single year. Residents in the area are reportedly outraged, arguing that these retailers have a civic duty to stay and service communities in need. Now, stores like Walgreens, CVS, this is another story just out this week. In Washington, D.C., the Crown Heights location is closing down. But they haven't had any product on the shelves at the Crown Heights CVS for a year because it just walks out the front door. And then you go up the street and you've got these open-air kiosks where people are selling the stuff that they've just looted from the CVS. Now, this is bad when you're losing pharmacies in those areas because now people can't get their medication that's needed. But there is no civic, moral, or legal obligation for retailers to stay in a place where they are losing money. In Chicago, there are no Walmart stores inside the city limits of Chicago any longer. Portland, Oregon has lost its a number of its major retailers. San Francisco retailers are fleeing the city left, right, and center. In Massachusetts, again, Boston being the biggest city there, retailers estimated to lose $2 billion a year to criminal theft. And we're told that the big problem in these cities is that people can't get access to food deserts. And so the reason they're obese is that they're going to the convenience store or the gas station and stocking up on chips and candy bars. Well, okay, maybe. Again, poor choices have consequences, but some of these poor choices are voting for district attorneys who don't prosecute theft, create an environment where retailers can't turn a profit and leave the city, abandoning the city and creating these so-called food deserts, despite the presence of a lot of people carrying extra weight. This is a problem. But I think what we're seeing here in these complaints about retailers fleeing cities and creating these food deserts are liberals complaining about the consequences, having to live with the consequences of their electoral choices. And that is why real estate values in places like the rural Missouri Ozarks have spiked in the last 4 years. And why we're seeing a news story this week about a venture fund based in Kentucky that plans to develop rural communities in the eastern highland rim of Tennessee and Kentucky. People who want to get away from these crime-infested extremely expensive urban centers here in these United States. So while, for example, the city of Chicago tries to solve the problem by floating the idea of city-owned grocery stores that will stay and serve the food deserts, I think Americans who see with clear eyes realize the problem is not the food deserts. The problem is who's running these big cities and why our urban centers are losing population at a rapid rate. Don't like the way things are happening in your city? Then vote differently. And to the Democrats running these major cities, creating these food deserts filled with overweight people, bless your pointy little heads. We've got a couple of things on the calendar for this year, but the calendar is in flux. Obviously, we couldn't predict when we scheduled our Israel tour, the Israel-Hamas war. We'll talk more about that in just a second. Skywatch TV is a virtual conference confronting the darkness coming up in just a few weeks. Skywatch TV will have details on that coming up in the next week or two. Sharon is writing her presentation this weekend, and I have an idea in my head for what I'm going to talk about, so I will probably flesh that out here soon, record it. This will be a virtual conference. We are hoping and praying for more in-person conferences this year, and we do actually have some scheduled. For example, the first weekend in April 5th through 7th in Dallas, the Prophetic Signs in the Heavenlies Conference. This is Hear the Watchman. This will be at the Hilton DFW Lakes Conference Center in Grapevine, Texas, near the Dallas-Fort Worth Airport. Registration for this one, by the way, is just $35. $35. And why is it called Prophetic Signs in the Heavenlies? Because that's the weekend of the total eclipse. So you come to Dallas, stick around on Monday the 8th, and you can watch the total eclipse of the sun with us from the hotel. Great lineup of speakers, as always, for Hear the Watchman conferences. Paul Begley, Colonel David Giamona, Pastor Casper McLeod, David Hevner, Dr. Carrie Mayday. If you followed her during the pandemic, this is a chance to hear from her in person. Dave Hodges, Michael Boldea, Tuv Rose, John Moore, David Paxton, Doug Thornton. Look forward to talking with him about the expedition that he and Timothy Alberino took to Peru to investigate the pelacatas, the face peelers. Again, this is April 5th through the 8th. The 8th, again, the total eclipse of the sun crossing America that day. The Hilton DFW Lakes Conference Center, a great facility, and we hope to see you there. Information and registration at hearthewatchmen.com, hearthewatchmen.com. His Call Ministries. We will be back there again this June 21st through 23rd. His Call Ministries in Sparta, Missouri, the beautiful Finley River Ranch. Alec and Ginny Wade, and boy, we are honored to call them our friends. We look forward to being there. Sharon and I will be speaking. It'll just be the two of us that weekend, Friday evening, Saturday, and then Sunday morning. And you can join us as well. The theme of the conference, we just settled on that today, in fact, as I'm recording this. The theme will be The Gates of Hell, which is the title of our forthcoming book that we are working on. So since that research is top of mind, that will be the subject of the weekend. Portals, the Gates of Hell. What is the deal? In fact, you get sort of a preview, I guess, if you watch last week's View from the Bunker, the Iron and Myth discussion with Brian Godawa, Judd Burton, and Doug Van Dorn on portals. Again, June 21st through 23rd. For more information, it's hiscallministries.com, hiscallministries.com. July will be in Dayton, Ohio, actually outside Dayton, Brookville, Ohio, the Harvest Revival Center for the Go Therefore Conference. That's July 26th and 27th. Dr. Michael Lake, L.A. Marzulli, Dr. Gregory Reed, Pastor Carl Gallups, Dr. Judd Burton, Pastor Paul Begley, and then Sharon and me. We happy to be there just to watch that group to get together, but we get to speak as well, and we hope you join us. There will be streaming video available for that conference. If you can't be there in person, do take advantage of it. Either be there in person or stream the video. Again, go thereforeconference.com, July 26th and 27th, and we hope to see you there for that. The last weekend in October, we may be in the Glasgow, Scotland area. This is looking to be a strong probability, the Nephilim Anthropology Conference. And we will have more details on that as they become available, but just giving you an early heads up on that one. That looks like it should be fascinating. Now, our Israel tour, which was scheduled for late March, early April, because of the conflict between Israel and Hamas that seems to be spreading, we have rescheduled for early November, 3rd through 12th. However, that not only coincides with the election here in the United States, and there have been people who said, I really want to be here to vote in person, given what happened last time. Totally get that. And news that despite the fact that we're now at, almost 4 months in on the war between Israel and Hamas, it's estimated that Hamas has lost about a third of its fighting force. So do the math on that. Could be this conflict extends well into 2024, in which case we will probably shove the tour back into 2025, which we've already got dates for. That would be the Iron and Myth tour with Pastor Doug Van Dorn, Dr. Judd Burton, and we'll see if Timothy Albarino can reschedule if we decide to do that. Now, there is something else. I want to float this idea to you for your feedback. We've been approached by Lipkin Tours about the possibility of a small group, 20, 30 people maybe, to visit Israel, probably late spring, maybe early summer, probably May timeframe, to visit some of the areas that were hit on October 7th, the town of Sderot in the Negev, to visit the public square in Tel Aviv, where the hostages are still being remembered, and a number of other locations. This would be a one-week tour, not as costly as, say, the usual tour, which is 2 weeks plus 3 days in Jordan. Again, this would be a small group. It would be to witness with our own eyes the consequences of this conflict. It would also be a benefit to Israel, of course, because their economy is essentially at a standstill. When they've got 1 million people who've been called up into the reserves instead of working. Aaron Lipkin, the CEO of Lipkin Tours, called up by the IDF reserves. One of his main tour guides, Kuti Ben David, serving in the same unit. So would you be interested? Obviously, safety would be of paramount concern. These would be areas where things are safe. And Sharon and I are interested, but we don't want to jump ahead of the group. So if you are interested, you can email me, derek@gilberthouse.org, derek@gilberthouse.org. We're just trying to get a sense for whether this is something people would be interested in doing. Seeing with our own eyes what has taken place. Yeah, we would like to be able to do that and report back. If you're interested, again, derek@gilberthouse.org, and we will let people know within a week or two, because this is obviously a quick turnaround. So if you've got the resources and the time available where you can take a week off and would like to go see with your own eyes what is taking place there, understanding that the media here in the West doesn't really report what accurately goes on over there, this might be a worthwhile trip. Again, derek@gilberthouse.org, and then just keep an eye on our website and our app, where we will make all this information available as soon as we reach a decision. Speaking of, please take advantage of our mobile app. It is free, available for iOS, Android, and Amazon Kindle Fire phones and tablets. It's not only a way to get all of our content and guarantee that we don't get canceled, because it is a Christian company that hosts the content. They will not cancel us from our own app. It is also a way to communicate and reach out, connect with others. There is a messaging feature, a groups feature. You look at the little app, the top right-hand corner there. There's a couple of what looks like talk balloons. Click on that, and you can go in and talk about these various programs, ask for prayer, offer prayer, ask questions directly of Sharon and me, and more. Again, it is free, available for iOS, Android, and Amazon Kindle Fire phones and tablets. And you can find a link at the website, VFTB.net, or go to gilberthouse.org/app, gilberthouse.org/app. Thank you for taking time out of your schedule to watch or listen wherever you are consuming this podcast. And if you are subscribing to us through a podcatcher like Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Spreaker, Pandora, or wherever fine podcasts are sold, we appreciate a good review, a thumbs up, if you will. Our announcer is the inimitable DC Good. And A View from the Bunker is a production of Gilbert House Ministries, released under Creative Commons Attribution, not commercial, no derivatives 4.0 international license. We do this because we wrestle not against flesh and blood. Good night, Oliver, wherever you are. I'm Derek Gilbert, and this is A View from the Bunker.